What's good? It's Woog. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. We have Petr Yan, 15 wins and 2 losses, taking on Cory Sandhagen, 14 wins and 3 losses. This fight will be for the Bantamweight Interim Title. The actual champ, or at least official champion, Aljamain won the belt in a disqualification versus Petr Yan. Petr Yan had won the title in the fight prior, fighting for the vacant bantamweight belt against Jose Aldo. His first title defense, again against Aljamain, resulted in a disqualification of Petr Yan, as Petr Yan kneed Aljamain in the head, as Aljamain was ruled a downed opponent. So this was a case where the disqualification actually led to the title changing hands. And there are a lot of differing opinions on how that type of title exchange, or what the resolution should be for disqualifications like that in title fights. Basically, how should that be handled and where should the title go? Another discussion for another day. I do have a couple solutions, and feel free to ask in the comments and I'll respond accordingly. But I want to definitely get into how we got to Petr Yan versus Cory Sandhagen and what I expect to take place between the two. So Petr Yan, I've been thinking for a minute, like, what is the secret sauce to what makes Petr Yan tick? And since hitting the UFC in, 2018, he's basically gone, he went 7 for 7 in his first 7 fights, won them all, and then finally lost via, again, disqualification to Sterling. But every fight, the quality of opponent was increasing a little bit. And then by the time he got to the fight against John Dodson, this is February 2019, where Dodson, obviously a former title contender, he was one of the only guys back in the day who could really push Demetrious Johnson at flyweight. Obviously, Benavidez and even Ian McCall had good outings against Demetrious Johnson, but John Dodson had such fast hands that when he was about to lock horns with Yan late in Dodson's career, like, Dodson was pretty much already seen to be a very old, or at least, in terms of ring wear, an aging fighter. People were kind of split in terms of how Petr Yan would handle this step-up opponent in John Dodson. And Petr Yan won just about every round. I mean, it was only a 3-rounder, and he won every round, but by the end of it, Dodson was just a beaten man. And even though the first round was very competitive, you could see that the torrential downpour of activity over time from Yan just started to step up as the fight went on. So he might be a pretty risk-mitigating starter to his fights, but by the time you get into the second and third round, you could tell that he's just getting warmed up by the second and by the third. And when I think about Yan fights, it's like he doesn't seem to have like the one-punch knockout power necessarily. He doesn't seem to have like the blazing hand speed. I mean, him and Dodson was pretty even, but Dodson might have even had a slight hand speed advantage. So it's not that truly makes Yan tick, even though he doesn't have slow hands by any measure. But you have to keep in mind, Yan was an amateur boxer in the Russian amateur system, which, they spawn some great talents, and they have one of the best amateur systems. And Yan had like 70 plus amateur boxing fights before he even thought about doing MMA. So you have to understand that his stand-up game, at least with the hands and with the footwork, is more sophisticated than most other fighters. So while he doesn't have like the dance around type of, foot speed, he's not, Muhammad Ali style. He doesn't just work the perimeter and, stay on the balls of his feet, bouncing around and sticking and moving. That's not Petr Yan. But he does have a deceptive footwork game where he does have pretty fast feet if you just isolate and watch his feet during his fights. But it's like the stutter step, feints with his feet. Like, some people will feint with the hands, some will feint with the head or with the shoulders or with the upper body movement. Petr Yan is good enough with the feet where he could actually kind of da-da-da-da and get the opponent to react based on that foot feint. I mean, Alexander Usyk, in boxing terms, just did it with former champ, now Anthony Joshua, to where he was getting Joshua to clinch up and to react to his foot feints. Again, Alexander Usyk was coming from that Russian, or in this case, Ukraine amateur system. And like Yan, Usyk is also a southpaw. So again, Yan is a southpaw who's able to exercise great sophisticated foot feints while maintaining an intelligent pressure that, again, you might look okay in the first round against him, but by the second and third round, ask Jose Aldo, where, I mean, the first 3 fights between Yan and Aldo, and this was a big step up for Yan. Like, the first 3 rounds were pretty damn competitive, but again, he starts to turn up the heat, he being Yan, by the second and third round with that intelligent pressure, full of feints and, yes, heavy strikes. Don't underestimate his punching power, especially the way that he'll whip his right hook or straight left hand, and he'll switch stances pretty fluidly too, to where before you know it, he just switched stances and you weren't even really aware of what he just did. It's really interesting stuff. So after Yan beat John Dodson, he then beat Jimmy Rivera, who's always kind of been like a perpetual ranked number 5 to number 10, somewhere in there type of contender in the division. Well, Yan beat Rivera another step up after Dodson, because Dodson had his biggest heyday down at flyweight. But Yan beat Jimmy Rivera via unanimous decision, and then he stopped Uriah Faber, just destroyed him. I mean, this took almost 3 rounds to do, but make no mistake, Yan was dominating pretty much that entire fight versus Faber, and it ended up being just torturous by the time that one was over. So after the stoppage of Uriah Faber in the 3rd round, that's when Yan had that vacant title fight versus Jose Aldo, where, again, those first 3 rounds were pretty damn competitive, even though Yan hurt Aldo badly in the 1st round. And, you know, my impression of the fight after seeing it once and then the way the memory stuck in my head, the fight felt less competitive than when I rewatched the fight. It was upon the rewatch that I was reminded, like, damn, again, through 3 rounds, this thing was very competitive. It was in the balance going into the 4th, and then Yan dominated Aldo in the 4th, to where Aldo was basically just hanging on by the end of the 4th round, and then stopped Aldo in the 5th round. So Yan was looking like a king by that time. But yeah, Yan was getting pasted up. He got hurt to the body a couple times. He even got rocked a couple times up top. Like, Aldo was very competitive in the tit-for-tat stand-up with Yan. But again, Yan, turning up the heat slowly over time, started to melt Aldo by the 3rd and 4th and certainly 5th round, to where Michael Bisping on the broadcast was calling for the ref to stop the fight. Basically, Aldo's not intelligently defending himself anymore. He's a beaten man. He just has too much heart to truly lay down his weapons. Well, the ref stopped the fight shortly thereafter. And then in Yan's first title defense against Aljamain Sterling, another competitive 1st round. I mean, Sterling was coming out, you know, just with a ton of activity, almost like Anthony Smith did in his fight against Glover Teixeira, who's also going to be on this UFC 267 card, competing for a title against current light heavyweight champion Jan Blachowicz. That's a battle between a 38-year-old and a 42-year-old, by the way. But yeah, Anthony Smith came out guns blazing against Glover Teixeira, and Aljamain Sterling came like with a kick, punch, kick, just doing all types of stuff. Almost like, what was the movie with Jim Carrey? Was it Cable Guy or The Mask, where Jim Carrey's like just doing this and acting like kind of shadow boxing and a ton of head movement? Well, Aljamain Sterling, again, was doing the most, and he won that round, basically, against Petr Yan. But by the time they got into the 2nd and 3rd round, Yan started to turn the tide. Again, he just starts picking up the activity when you get into the middle and late rounds, kind of a snowball effect of activity with, again, heavy punches, intelligent pressure, punches to the body and up top, mixing up the hand attack, being able to check leg kicks pretty well as well. I mean, he'll get hit with some leg kicks, which I imagine Cory Sandhagen is going to try to launch against Yan. I think that would be in Sandhagen's best interest to definitely use his dynamic striking to stem the tide. That's going to be Petr Yan coming downhill against Sandhagen, I'd imagine. But yeah, by the time they hit the 3rd and then the 4th round with Yan versus Sterling, before he got disqualified, Sterling looked like he was barely hanging on, like he was just starting to get brutalized and just trying to change position. Maybe this will work. Maybe I could get out of danger this way or this way. Just changing position, where it was pretty much the same story of a beatdown, but different position as Sterling was trying to scramble and trying to seek shelter, essentially. Well, in that fight again, Aljamain Sterling came away with the actual UFC Bantamweight title. So this is Petr Yan's first fight since that disqualification loss that costed him the title, and he's taking on Cory Sandhagen, who, when he joined the UFC after being in the LFA, for a few fights, he was just, knocking his first few opponents out. But it was really the fight against John Lineker, who is a 5'3" fighter. Yan is 5'7.5". Sandhagen is unusually tall for a 135er. 5'11" at 135. Think about that. But yeah, when he fought John Lineker, who was a step-up opponent for Sandhagen at the time, again, just 5'3", to where, it was anybody's guess who was going to take this one, because we've seen Lineker in there with some elite fighters. We hadn't seen Sandhagen with elite fighters yet, but against John Lineker, he did a masterful job at controlling the spacing, making sure that Lineker wasn't able to continuously close the distance, close the range, and get his hard-ass punches off and connect cleanly against Sandhagen. Good defensive fight. He basically outpointed Lineker to a split decision win. Impressive win for Sandhagen. But in his next fight against Assunção, he won that via unanimous decision. Again, this is probably another tier up, you could argue, from John Lineker, Rafael Assunção. But Sandhagen won that, and then he takes on Aljamain Sterling for basically a battle of top-tier contenders, where you got the impression that the winner of this fight is going to be fighting for the title next. Well, it didn't take long for Aljamain Sterling, who's got a sensational wrestling background, to somehow take Cory Sandhagen's back in a scramble, end up is trying to sink a rear naked choke with one arm and then switching arms, finally sinking the rear naked choke in the first round, causing Cory Sandhagen to tap within the first minute and a half of the fight. Huge win for Aljamain Sterling. That's what got him that title shot against Petr Yan, and just a very confusing and frustrating and just kind of a what the hell type of moment and setback for Cory Sandhagen. Well, it didn't take long for Sandhagen to get right back in the cage. He was back in within like 4 months against former title challenger Marlon Moraes, who was like a surging fighter at the time. He got a very close disputed win via decision in a super close fight against Jose Aldo. And Moraes lost in a close title fight opportunity against Henry Cejudo, where Moraes had Cejudo in trouble, was winning early in the fight. Cejudo turned the tide and ended up stopping Marlon Moraes. And Marlon Moraes, since this fight against Cory Sandhagen, has had basically a ton of tough luck going forward. But with Moraes versus Sandhagen, this was supposed to be a redemptive fight for both Moraes and Sandhagen for different reasons, but they were still seen to be like just axe killers, like just very dangerous strikers. And in this fight, Sandhagen hits Moraes with a spinning wheel kick and just clips Moraes in the head. Moraes goes kind of tumbling, and Sandhagen in short order ends up stopping Marlon Moraes in the second round with the punches that followed that spinning wheel kick. Sensational knockout TKO stoppage win for Cory Sandhagen. This basically put him right back on the map after that disappointing, not devastating, but disappointing loss against Aljamain Sterling. Well, after that win against Moraes, Sandhagen's right back in the cage again, but this time against former lightweight champ Frankie Edgar, who, has been weight searching. 145 didn't work out. 155, he's seen his best days there. So now he's in 135 fighting Sandhagen. And within the first 30 seconds of this fight, Sandhagen basically anticipates Frankie Edgar, who was a pretty masterful MMA-style boxer in his heyday. Well, Sandhagen anticipated that Edgar was going to dip a certain direction, and Sandhagen just did a jumping knee. Not one of those flying knees where you're coming at the guy, but basically almost jumping straight up and down, but with the knees going out like that. Caught Frankie Edgar perfectly with this jumping knee, and that was all she wrote. I mean, he basically had Frankie Edgar slumped to the ground, stiff body, lifeless damn near. Frankie Edgar was just down and out. This wasn't a TKO. This was a knock the hell out type of knockout. Scary, sensational knockout win for Cory Sandhagen. So he was, I mean, you talk about how to recover from a disappointing loss, like the submission choke that he suffered against Aljamain Sterling. Well, those knockouts over Marlon Moraes and Frankie Edgar were beautiful. And then he fights TJ Dillashaw, who was coming off a multi-year suspension after becoming the bantamweight champion, knocking Cody Garbrandt out twice, and then flirted with flyweight and then got stopped by Henry Cejudo, who then tried to come up to 135 and successfully won a title there. Well, Dillashaw, again, huge suspension, came back, and his first opponent in that comeback is Cory Sandhagen, who now is just knocking at the door once again for a title shot. And this ends up being a sensational fight. Like, you know, people are talking about the controversy in terms of who should have won, Dillashaw or Sandhagen. Dillashaw won this fight in a split decision. I actually had Dillashaw winning 3-2. I think the slight majority of people, just as far as I could tell, at least the ones who I saw feedback from, might have given it to Sandhagen, like Luke Thomas of Morning Combat. You know, I think he had Sandhagen edging it. I had Dillashaw edging it, but I dislike when the narrative or the takeaway from a sensational fight like this ends up being the controversy and not how great of a fight this was, because how back and forth this damn thing was. Like, Cory Sandhagen had a lot of success, especially early, where by the second round, it appeared that Dillashaw had, like, you know, hurt his leg, you know, so he's wounded there. And then it looked like he suffered a big cut in his eyes, and, you know, so his vision was impaired to where he even said in his corner that he couldn't see. Well, by that point, I'm thinking, oh man, this is not the kind of comeback that he was hoping for. I thought the writing was on the wall. I thought, damn, Sandhagen's about to stop TJ Dillashaw. Well, then Dillashaw just reached into his veteran bag and started fighting a very measured kickboxing fight with Cory Sandhagen, where, you know how Dillashaw does that lean? You know, he'll switch stances too, and he'll kind of keep the hand over here and then just shoot the punch, because when he's leaning like that, because his hand is right here where you're also playing defense, but now because Dillashaw being the shorter fighter, he's like 5'5", 5'6". Again, Sandhagen is 5'11". So Dillashaw, by leaning with his hand up like this, his hand has now traveled much of the distance that it's going to need to travel to hit the taller fighter. Well, because he switches stances, because he has intelligent foot movement and good feints himself, he'll lean, and then after the lean, shoot the punch. Very deceptive stuff, and he kept catching Sandhagen with these punches, and, you know, they were kicking, just brutal leg kicks on both ends, both trying to check legs. They kind of stopped checking leg kicks after a while. This was a very, very grueling fight, and again, Dillashaw was awarded a disputed, close, split decision win. And you got the impression that Sandhagen kind of left a little something on the table. Like, you could tell Dillashaw poured it all out. I want to say Sandhagen poured it all out, but Sandhagen made it sound like he thought that he did enough to win, but maybe this was a lesson learned and he should have just done more. And you feel like he could have done a little bit more, whether you're talking volume or just kind of going for broke, even though, I don't know, that lends itself to being vulnerable yourself. But yeah, Sandhagen's obviously as dangerous as a striker as you can find at bantamweight. So maybe he could have tried to put TJ away, but I don't know, man. TJ is as battle tested as they come. So it is what it is. This was a super close fight. TJ comes up with the win, but unfortunately suffers injuries in the process that he's had surgery, is recovering from. So he couldn't accept any sort of a title shot. And again, the champ, Aljamain Sterling, is currently inactive because of complications from the surgery that, you know, he had this neck and back surgery that he had been waiting to have for some time, but, you know, finally had it. Some say that he could have fought and then had the surgery. He opted to go ahead and take the surgery. So he's been inactive since that win against that DQ win against Petr Yan. So the champ is out. The rightful contender for the belt is out in TJ Dillashaw. So now you've got the next two guys up, and that is Petr Yan versus Cory Sandhagen. So what do I expect out of this very good interim bantamweight title fight? Well, I think that there's a small chance, but a chance, that Cory Sandhagen could put Yan away early just because he's one of the few guys in this division, Dillashaw is another one, who can catch you and hurt you so badly in the first round and just get you out of there because they could just do things that other fighters cannot do and certain opponents just aren't equipped to handle if you get caught by some stuff. Well, again, Cory Sandhagen is that damn dangerous in the stand-up, especially early. In fact, all of Sandhagen's stoppages since joining the UFC have come in the first or second round. Now, granted, he's only been in, like 2 fights scheduled for 5? No, it would be 3 if you're talking Dillashaw, Frankie Edgar, Moraes, all scheduled for 5. I don't think Aljamain Sterling. I think that was a 3-rounder. But he gets the stoppages early. Otherwise, he goes kind of into a round-winning mode, which is still super effective. I mean, a win's a win. But I get the feeling that if Yan can prevent from getting hurt badly in the first round, then the torrential downpour that I was referring to earlier is going to start wearing on Sandhagen, who has only been past the 3-round mark once, and it was against TJ Dillashaw in a fight where, again, I think Dillashaw won probably 2 out of the last 3 rounds or something like that. So, not that I'm saying that Sandhagen starts to fade in long fights. I mean, everybody fades to a degree in long fights. But I feel like their energy trajectories are 2 different things, where Sandhagen starts out hot and then he kind of plateaus and then kind of goes into this like cruising altitude for the rest of the fight. Whereas I feel like Yan kind of goes this way, where from the first round where he has a measured start, he starts picking it up over time. I think that's going to bode well for him, to where if this was a 3-rounder, I think I might even favor Sandhagen. But because this is a 5-round fight, since it's for an interim title, I'm actually going to go Petr Yan, but I don't think he's going to stop Sandhagen. I think he can stop Sandhagen because he starts to get brutal in the 3rd and 4th round. Again, just as Jose Aldo, ask Aljamain Sterling. Like, this guy's devastating, especially as the fight continues and as he senses that he's starting to break you. Psychologically, physically, spiritually. He just puts that type of, again, intelligent pressure on. So, again, Petr Yan's not 5'3" like John Lineker. He's 5'7.5". So, there is going to be a huge height gap between the two. And Yan doesn't even have a long reach for his height. For instance, like Aldo has like a 70-inch reach, and they're about the same height, both about 5'7". But Yan has what? I think a 67-inch reach. Yeah, a 67-inch reach against Cory Sandhagen's reach, which is, also a 70-inch reach. So technically they have the same reach, but because of the height differential, all reaches aren't treated the same, especially when you also factor in the leg length, because Sandhagen's legs are significantly longer than Yan's. So the effective reach is still going to favor Sandhagen. But I was mentioning the reach of Yan to say that he's not going to have too much trouble closing the range and being able to land effectively on Sandhagen because, again, he uses very sophisticated footwork, and I think that his feet are going to be able to get reactions out of Sandhagen, and I think that Sandhagen's offensive footwork is going to get certain reactions out of Yan that's going to allow Sandhagen to land effectively. So I think this is going to be a very even and competitive fight, especially through the first, I'd say, 2 rounds. I think that once they get into the 3rd round, I think that's where Yan's intelligent pressure and energy trajectory is going to start wearing on Sandhagen, to where I think that Yan is going to win 2 out of the last 3 rounds on at least 2 of the judges' scorecards, to where Yan should come away with, I think this is going to be a grueling fight. And I think this is really going to take a lot out of both guys. I don't see this as being an early stoppage. Again, I would qualify that by saying if anybody's capable of doing it, it's somebody with the skill set of Sandhagen, with the dynamic striking and the holy hell type of wild stuff that you could throw and actually land on somebody. But I think that the more likely scenario is that Petr Yan wins something like 4 rounds to 1, 3 rounds to 2, maybe even a split decision type victory, but I'm taking Petr Yan via decision win for the interim strap. But please, let me know what you think about Yan versus Sandhagen. This is a very, very interesting fight to me. I mean, Sandhagen wants this so bad, and I actually think that this might even be a little too soon for Sandhagen to be returning to the cage after such a rough fight against TJ Dillashaw. This was just in July. We're in like October. So August, September, 3 months later after a full 5-rounder, I've long thought that guys who go through hard 5-round fights should take longer to recover before jumping right back into the cage. So I don't love the timetable here for Sandhagen. I much rather a timetable like Petr Yan, who went, again, close to 4 rounds against Sterling and didn't take nearly the beating against Sterling that Sandhagen took against TJ Dillashaw. And Yan's fight against Sterling was back in March. So much longer time to recover. I think, this is an assumption here. This is just my assessment, but I think that he's a little bit fresher because I don't think you can recover from everything Sandhagen went through that damn quickly. But yeah, I'm taking Petr Yan via decision win. But please, let me know what you think about this fight in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. Also, by the way, what do you do with Aljamain Sterling and TJ Dillashaw? And how do you handle this title picture given their timetables of return? And also depending on who wins this Yan versus Sandhagen fight. But yeah, let me know what you think. Thanks again for tuning in.